Thank you so much, Ross, and thanks everyone who has joined in today. I'm super delighted to be here, sharing the thoughts on amplifying the voices of male victims of domestic abuse. I like us to actually begin with a question that aligns with today's discussion. And this question is, why do we need to amplify the voices of male victims of domestic abuse? And one of the things that might come to mind is, why single out male victims? I want to make it clear that I advocate for every voice because every voice matters and abuse really has no gender. However, there is a lack of awareness that men can also be victims of domestic abuse. Over the last 3 years, what I've seen is the reservation from professionals and agencies to actually accept that male can be victims and also to endorse the victim status for male victims. And when we look at the society, often views domestic abuse as a problem primarily affecting women. And in my experience over the years, this has actually led to the marginalization of male victims of domestic abuse. And when it comes to research as well, we've seen the underreporting of male victims, arguably within research as well, because primarily it has focused on female victims. We can go to the next slide. There's a research topic that I have read and read over the years. I'm sure they can help us put that in the chat box. And that research is by Coelho Wright in 2016. It's titled The Absent Voice of Male Domestic Abuse Victims, the Marginalization of Men in a System Originally Designed for Women. And it's rightly so when we start to look at the invincible scars of male victims. Why do I say invincible scars? Because when you look at physical abuse, what comes to mind with a lot of people, we have this notion that male cannot be physically abused. And there was also another research by Respect. Most of the research and that I'll be making inferences to will come from Respect and Mankind Initiative. And they looked at this research called Living a Life by Permission, the experiences of male victims of domestic abuse during the COVID. And men actually called in to sharing their experience about how they've been hit, scratched, slapped, beaten, punched in the face, grabbed, pushed and shoved, pushed down the stairs, and all of that. And it is invincible because one, the shame, the secrecy, the embarrassment, for male to actually come out and say to people that actually I have been a victim. So in the same way that every other victim experiences physical abuse, men does, experience physical abuse as well. When it comes to the emotional trauma, the fact that men often feel isolated and reluctant to share their experiences actually contributes significantly to emotional trauma that they endure. And this is because most of these abuse are being internalized. We haven't created the scope, the space for men to actually come out, to be vulnerable for once and say, actually, I'm going through this. And that has led to the increase in the number of mental health issues amongst men. And when we get to the aspect of statistics that we'll be exploring today, you would actually see how that triangulates into the incidences of suicide amongst men. And, especially where, victims of domestic abuse. The social stigma is one of those things that, has gone very, very hidden because we have this notion and the judgment on male victims. And the notion, again, coming down to the fact that men cannot be victims of domestic abuse. Can we go to the next slide, please? And when you look at the first one that says half of male victims, 49%, fail to tell anyone that they are victims of domestic abuse, and nearly 3 times less likely to tell anyone than female victims. Like I said earlier, this is actually due to the shame. Men cannot come out and say this. And the reality is that where the pocket few have actually come out to say this is what we're going through, people hardly believe them at all. I mean, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't mention name, I worked with a client that actually faced this same, scenario as well, in terms of not being able to. And when they have the boldness to tell people they've been laughed at, and the first research posted on the chat actually tells a lot about that, where male victims have actually approached police to tell them about their ordeal, and they've been laughed at and like, really? Are you sure you've been abused? Some of these men have actually been arrested, coming out to say, this is my experience, but then being arrested and taken out of the home. 11% of male victims are considered taking their life due to partner abuse. This is 7.2% of women. And this is the reality that male victims face. Don't forget, in our earlier slide, I talked about the emotional trauma. Because when you don't have a space for anyone to listen to you, when male victim approaches children's services, professionals, GP, and it comes down to one fact that the system hasn't actually created the space for male to unload their emotional trauma. So Respect is an organization that actually done a lot when it comes to male victims. So in 2020, 2021, Respect, let me just give us a background. Respect has an helpline. So they received over 47,000 contact by phone, email, and web chat. And according to their report, that was an increase of 57% compared to the 30,068 contacts made by victims in 2019-2020. So this highlights the scale of the problem and how overlooked it has been, as evidenced also by government funding. Earlier this year, I mean, like I said, this cut across a lot. Earlier this year, I'll show us that as well later. There was a research by the National Center for Domestic Abuse. I'm just going to read that up. And that highlights the reason why men stay in abusive relationship. So the number one reason is concern about their children. 89% of male doing their research said, they have concern about their children, followed by the considering marriage, that marriage is for life. So a lot of men have gone through this, aspect of, I won't allow you to see your children. And so they would rather stay in the abuse. So fear of never seeing their children again, that amounted to about 68%. And a lot of them is like a belief that this behavior in their partner would change over time. And from my experience as well, it came to the fact that a lot of men didn't even know that they were going through abuse because they thought it's something that should be done to them. So all these figures really evidences one thing, that this is a problem that is so deeply hidden and underrepresented. And that is partly due to the fact that it doesn't fit in quotes into societal norms. I've had, discussion with professionals, and some professionals have actually asked me, have you been abused at, before? And is this the reason why you're championing this cause? It's really shocking. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide is a video. It's a short video. It's called Paint. And this is produced by City College Norwich students working with the Norfolk Police to raise awareness. I want us to take a deep breath, watch this video, and it's actually, telling us about, how abuse is not so obvious for male victims and in fact for all victims. Let's have a look at this.
Someone's so eager to get hold of you, aren't they?
I'll go get the ticket.
everything okay? Is that my phone?
Yeah, it is. Is that a problem? I see that you're going out with your friends. And you didn't even think to ask me. You never think about me, do you? You're nothing but a selfish boy. I'm the one that looks after you. Why would you want anyone else? You think I'm just gonna sit here and wait for you whilst you're out with your stupid, idiot friends? Oh my god. I only do this because I love you. You never think about me, do you? You're nothing without me anyways. Stop being so pathetic. Nothing but selfish. You know you're nothing without me anyways. Come on, stop looking so pathetic.
Next slide, please. So when we look at that video, the catchphrase at the end says, if abuse was this obvious. And that is the tale of many, many. We can see the subtleness in the coercive and controlling behavior. And we can see how, that illustrative video in terms of how the male there actually, cowered in. The ability to challenge back wasn't there at all because he didn't know what to do. And this goes on and on. So some of the barriers to seeking help really, it's about the societal expectations. Male victims struggle with the perception that they should be able to handle the abuse. And I've seen that a lot. This year, I think January, February this year, in the edition of, the professional standard, the professional social work magazine, it actually featured a story of a male victim. It says reflection of a male survivor of female perpetrated domestic abuse. I'm just going to read. This is a learned person that finished from Cambridge University, and on page 26 it says, I did not perceive the physical and sexual violence to which my wife subjected me or the severe emotional, psychological, or financial abuse as domestic abuse. To me, domestic abuse was what men did to women, because that is how Western society has traditionally defined it. And I had unconsciously internalized this perception. My reaction to violent incidents was always passive. It was impossible to walk away from her escalating anger and aggression. Trying to do so only made her angrier. So I usually ended up called into a ball on the floor where I would be punched, kicked, scratched until she blew herself out. The questions are, who are the victims of domestic abuse and who defines it? And when you look at, in terms of resources, government resources, organization resources are actually directed one-sided. And on that same, publication, it says the Home Office strategy to end violence against women and girls, first published in 2016 and updated in July 2021, includes 80 million of dedicated funding to core support for refugees and other accommodation-based services, rape support centers, and national helpline. Let me not bore us with a lot of reading, but the reality is that some of these resources, in terms of funding, in terms of services, are actually directed to one side. And that's one of the reasons I advocate for, let us look at the other side of the coin and let us see really that when it comes to equality, when it comes to empathy, it should actually be across the board. Let's go to the next slide, please. This next slide is also a video. This was a video in 2019 by Sky News. And one of the things we cannot underestimate as well when it comes to amplifying the voices of male victims is the role that media plays in all of this. Let's have a watch.
My experience really was just about a psychological abuse where I felt I was going mad.
Alan's abuser was his wife. For years he suffered alone. She bullied and belittled him, and when he finally tried to get help, he was ignored.
I was thinking I ought to be able to handle this situation. I ought to be able to sort of sort this situation out. I ought to be able to make the marriage work. When I made a complaint to the police about my wife, I was laughed at by the officer who came round.
Alan believes this was because he was a man. He feels male victims of domestic abuse for too long have been sidelined and silenced. Official figures show 1 in 3 domestic abuse victims is a man. That's around 450,000 victims in the UK per year. But the real figure could be much higher, with men twice more likely than women to hide the abuse they are suffering and fewer places where men specifically can get help. Campaigners say this has to change.
A very common experience is for a man to be forced to leave his home, even his family, and have nowhere to go other than to a homeless hostel or to the streets. And when you look at the reasons for homelessness, violent relationship breakdowns are one of the major reasons why men become homeless and even rough sleeping. And that's scandalous. It really should not happen in 2019.
It's a freezing morning in Liverpool, not an ideal place for a swim or a typical place to talk about male domestic abuse.
We wanted to highlight domestic abuse with men. It was set up in Tibby for our great mate Paul, who we lost, tragic circumstances.
Their mate, Paul, died after being attacked by his girlfriend. They discovered he'd been a victim of domestic abuse repeatedly, but was too embarrassed to say.
Our friend would be here today, Paul Lavelle. He loved this, but he's not here. And it's not recognised that it's happening to likes of Paul and other men, and it should be. It's wrong and needs to stop.
A swim can't bring back their friend, but it can bring men together to talk, to tackle the stigma for male survivors and help them help themselves. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News in Liverpool.
Let's go to the next slide, please. And that was actually the birth of Thrive Network. I had the opportunity to be part of the innovation program of Frontline, where, all these ideas started. And I've been working with male perpetrators for over the years. And part of the reasons was the fact that some of the men would actually come to me to say, actually, they're not perpetrators, but they're victims. But who would listen to them? Let's go to the next slide, please. So we know what the problems are in terms of the limited support for male victims, lack of local services with focused in-depth support beyond confidential helplines. And most of the organizations out there, one of the things that people concentrate on is the helpline. And I heard towards the end of last year, a couple of organizations have actually closed down because no one is looking into funding. No one thought actually this is an area that we should look into. And in 2021, I did a market survey. I looked at the 32 local authorities across London, and I reached out to a specific group of managers, highlighting for them to tell me what support services they have in place for male victims. And only 4 out of 32 came back to say that they've got something in place. And I reached out to this manager, so please tell me, what actually do you have in place? What is it called? And it came to the fact that they refer male victims to Respect. And I had a meeting with Respect. Respect said to me, well, they've only got helplines. And in another research by Respect, if you can please put that in the chat, it's called Living a Life by Permission. One of the things that they came out with was the fact that they recommended that it's only little that the helpline can do. So they said high quality support services are needed as a place for the Respect Men's Helpline to refer and follow on support. Many of the men calling needed more than a helpline and were in need of more local support, which was not always available. And that is the problem. Let us go to the next slide, please. So I'll quickly brush through because I'm mindful of our time. And these are the things that we can do: inclusive support services, empathetic responses. When men actually come out to say, this is what they're going through, we need to give listening ears and not just discard and say, because I've often heard professionals say, what if they're actually coming in pretending that they are victims? And my question to them is that, have we assessed them in the first place? Have we created the space? So there has to be a lot of public awareness campaigns as well, which is one of the things, I put upon myself to do through Thrive Network. And, really thankful to Frontline for this opportunity. There also has to be the legal and policy changes in terms of how policy focuses on advocating for male victims of domestic abuse. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we have to change certain narrative in how we redefine masculinity, because for a lot of people, there's this misconception of, misconstrued masculinity, where we feel men could defend themselves, they are bold, they are strong. No, that is not the case. Men also cry. Men also have feelings. They may not show it, like I said. We heard in that, Sky News report, when they talked about their friend feeling, the embarrassment is there. So there also has to be an inclusive approach. When we look at our local authorities, our organizations, what services are in place? What policy are in place? Do we even have it on our referral forms at all to creating that space? Do we even want to talk about it at all? So there has to be an inclusive approach. I was going to deliver one of these kind of presentation last year, June, and it was shocking that the organizer canceled on me, and it came down to one point, and they were open in the end. They said they don't feel comfortable about this, and this is really shocking. They said they don't feel comfortable, and I thought this is a platform that should promote equality, that should promote empathy, but that presentation was canceled because they thought, no, we're not comfortable. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we need to empower male victims to speak out. And one of the ways we do this is acknowledge that there is a problem. Acknowledge that male victims do exist. And when we do that, we encourage them to seek professional help. We encourage them to know that they can be vulnerable. We encourage them as well to break the silence. We encourage them by sharing the stories. If you go online, a lot of men, even in the UK, have actually passed sadly because of the abuse they've experienced. Next slide, please. So it's similar to the other one. We need to raise awareness. We need to demand equality. We need to build coalitions. We need to donate and volunteer. There's a lot we can do within this first scope in terms of, advocating for change. My question to everyone here is, what are we doing individually? In the community, behind closed doors, a lot of men are suffering. It's time for us to speak out. The last slide, please. And this is about the road ahead. We need to reclaim that strength. Male victims can rebuild their self-esteem and regain the sense of agency through counseling and support services. Just like I said, through respect and Mankind Initiative, all these organizations are saying to us that, look, helpline would not solve this issue. The same way that when we look at other victims of domestic abuse, we didn't just put in helpline. There are one-to-one support, people going out there. There are wrapped around support services, and that should not exclude male victims of domestic abuse as well. I think I'm going to stop now. Thank you so much for listening.
Oyeyinka, thank you very much for that presentation. I thank everyone that's watching. Really interesting to hear that perspective, I think, in terms of and how you've put it across so eloquently. So thank you so much for that presentation this morning. If anyone does have any questions for Oyeyinka, we've just got a few minutes before 12 o'clock, but please do put them into the chat and I can ask Oyeyinka anything that comes through. There's just some thanks from Angela in terms of that presentation being an eye-opener. I just had a quick query in terms of thinking about, do you think that it links to kind of the wider statistics around the challenges of social workers having difficulties engaging men and engaging fathers more broadly, and that might also then link into, if we're not engaging with men particularly effectively, and statistics would support that, then actually we're going to struggle to then, support and unearth maybe the abuse that there may be. Do you think that's maybe another additional issue?
You're quite right. That is an additional issue because, and that is why the system we built in has to change in the way we approach men. So, say for example, when a referral comes in at all, the first point of call is we want to call the mothers. People don't even think about where is the dad in this situation. So men would need to, for us to build that trust. They will need to see that trust in us as agencies. They will need to see that there's the level of inclusion in the way we approach, in the way we call, in the way we conduct our assessments as well. So if, say, for example, there's a case of domestic abuse that's been referred, as a social worker or any practitioner working with the family, we don't just assume that the male is the perpetrator. And so that is the starting point where how can we involve, how can we engage fathers? And I know a lot of local authorities and organizations are actually looking into that in terms of where are the fathers? We need to be asking questions. Let just don't let us just say, oh, they won't engage anyway, but what effort have we made in the first place to bring them in?
Yeah, great. There's a quick question or a couple of questions. So Joanna asks, firstly, thanks for your presentation, but then as a female student social worker, how can I practice as an ally?
Thank you very much. One of the ways to do that really is start by advocating, start by raising awareness. When I started Thrive, I wanted to go straight into supporting main victims, but I was met with a lot of, objections. And that made me to realize, actually, when people don't know about the statistics and what is going on, how would they buy into it in the first place? So allyship, when it comes to this subject matter, would mean that we're also advocating, we're raising the awareness, we're having service team away, the team meetings, and saying, can we talk about this topic? And that is how it will, penetrate and permeate through our systems, where conveniently and comfortably, I know it's a sensitive issue, don't get me wrong, but until we start to talk about it, we won't find that easiness around it as well. And so, as an ally, what you can do, please, is let's advocate, let's talk about it, let's bring it up in our team meetings, let's go to our mass referrals team and say to them, when you get referrals on male victim, what are you doing about it? So it comes with a level of respectfully challenging the status quo as well.
Oh, that's great, Yinka. Just before we finish, there's just one final question from Hannah, which just kind of asks, do you think attracting more well-trained and aware male social workers to the profession might help?
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that, I'm looking at in the local authority that I'm currently based. Because one of the things for men is that, when I started working with perpetrators, even, they would tell you that, look, they would gravitate towards a male. Not that they don't want female. Of course, we have female in the group as well. But the thing is that we need more men to come forward. We need more males to come forward to champion this cause as well. And I believe when male victims starts to see that, it builds that confidence that actually, this is going on. And it will also help survivors to come forward and share their experiences. And that will help male victims in terms of knowing that they're not alone. Some people are going through this and they will get support.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Yinka, for today's presentation. We've come to the end of our time. I'm sure we could have went on a lot longer, but we'll maybe get you back to do a longer presentation another time. But thank you so much.